Mics on, please. All right, welcome everybody to this planning board meeting, Wednesday, October 16th, 2019. First item on our agenda is a roll call. Tonight we have with us our newest member, Joe Sprecher. Welcome. Welcome. Yes, we have Krista Swinton, we have Jed McIntosh, myself, Phil Ruck, we've got Dave Thompson, and we got Mike Costello down on the end. Joe, as I mentioned a bit ago, trial by fire, you're right in as a voting member tonight. Next up is acceptance of the agenda. Have a motion?
Move for acceptance.
Very good. Second. Any comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the agenda as presented. All right, moving on. Approval of the minutes of August 28th, 2019. Is this Caitlin's her last duties?
Her last effort.
Yeah.
I move acceptance of the minutes.
Very good, thank you, Krista.
Second.
Second, any comments, edits? I looked very quickly at them. I did not have a chance to go into detail.
There are a couple of typos, but I don't think they matter, so I think we leave them alone.
We can edit those before.
What's that?
We can edit those before we put them into the record.
Okay, so you want them
You
on the
want
record?
to know exactly which ones? Do you have them marked already?
Sure.
I shouldn't have said anything, huh?
Well,
All right, we can go back.
Okay.
Yep. Let's do it.
Page 4.
Tradition. Yeah.
First paragraph. The line next to the bottom of that line of that paragraph, it starts with WECF.
Yep.
Okay. And then it goes on to stated that there would be no issues treating
I see.
waste, and I think that's supposed to be waste.
Yes.
Good catch.
And on page 5, the fifth paragraph up from the bottom, next to the last line, we have a sentence that's
The end.
a line that starts with requirement, and then Bob Yerkser, Director of Public Works, stated that erosion control measures
And
and I think there should be and tracking underneath.
Probably needs to be paid attention to, right? Need to be, or is it erosion control measures and tracking? Okay, they need to. Never mind. All right, any more? Any more?
Yeah, that's it. Just
okay. I'll let Caitlin know tomorrow.
Good one. All right, so we have a motion, we have a second. So all those in favor as amended? Unanimous. Moving on, we have new business. We have 2 public hearings this evening. Zoning change. The first one is a zoning change to expand the village commercial district along Main Street that would include 85, 87, 88, and 92 Main Street. Kyle, you prepared a nice memorandum for us, but could you give us a summary? Very good.
That's the general area that we talked about. The Main Street there. Okay, so a little while ago, kind of what started this whole thing was the owner of Alpenglow came into the town office. Alpenglow is located at 92 Main Street, which is sort of across the street from one of those darker red lots there. And Alpenglow is currently, it's in the medium density residential district. It's both a residential use and they have their home business there, which is their retail kind of store that they have on the lot. They were hoping to operate as just a normal commercial retail store rather than a home business, as the home businesses have stricter regulations and standards when it comes to things like number of employees that are allowed to work on a lot at a business, or kind of advertising methods and sign size limitations, and things like that. So they weren't really looking to expand structurally or really, the scope of their business. They simply wanted to have a few more employees. They wanted to have an outdoor tent sale type event, like an annual event type thing. And I think they wanted to enlarge their signage a little bit. So it was nothing, crazy, but it was outside the scope of what their home business allowed. So when something like that comes up, there are really two options. It's that, the lot in which a use is located on either goes down the path of a contract zone where, kind of changes are made to only that lot, or on the town side, we just look at rezoning an area altogether. So in this case, it seemed to make sense to just look at rezoning that lot and the couple of neighboring lots to village commercial, as those lots abutted very closely to the village commercial that already exists. So, if you can see up there, the pink is the already existing village commercial. That red area is where, the church is, and that's a contract zone village commercial. And then that orange is high density residential, and the rest of that is medium density residential, the yellow. So there's two small lots on the left side of Main Street, and then there would be two lots on the right side of Main Street that would be added to the village commercial. It would allow Alpenglow to operate as a regular commercial retail store rather than a home business. And it would allow those lots to operate as any other use allowed in the village commercial. So currently they're single-family homes. Single-family homes are still an allowable use in the village commercial. So if the owners of those lots don't want anything to change, then nothing needs to change. It can remain exactly as it is. When you look at kind of our current zoning for the medium density residential, the minimum lot size in the MDR right now is 20,000 square feet. Those three of those four lots, the three lots excluding Alpenglow, are all well under 20,000 square feet. I think one of them is about 2,500 square feet, and two of them are in the 5,000 square foot range. So the minimum lot size in the village commercial is 2,000 square feet. So those lots actually fit the kind of general size of the village commercial much more than they fit the medium density residential district. So it just seemed to make sense to look at expanding the village commercial to kind of match up with what's already existing in that area. So with any zone change, though, it has to kind of go along with the goals of the comprehensive plan. You can't just simply change the district for kind of no reason other than you want to change it. So one of the this was in the memo, one of the issues and opportunities mentioned was adjusting the boundaries of the village commercial district, that the town would assure the ability for the Orono downtown to grow in a compact, walkable manner, building on the village architecture and character. So, this would kind of keep the village commercial along that Main Street corridor. It wouldn't encroach on the smaller residential streets like Juniper and Myrtle that are kind of on the back end of these lots. And, as noted in there, it kind of then connects the existing village commercial onto those couple lots that are currently contract zoned to kind of make it a continuous stretch of village commercial rather than having these breaks of medium density residential.
There wasn't a lot of discussion on the contract zone. Would it negate that, and those would just be now regular village commercial?
No, so those contracts are still in place and would probably look to remain in place because those contracts outline certain uses that are allowed in those lots in particular, I believe. So instead of having, the church, for instance, be used for every single use allowed in the village commercial, only certain, I forget exactly what uses the contract states are allowed, but I think it was lighter in impact and scale would be allowed there. So changing the underlying zone doesn't get rid of the contract. The contract would just be in addition to it. If the owners of those lots wanted to get rid of the contract, it could be a separate discussion, but that would be something separate to this. Beyond just, the village commercial, it has commercial in it, so a lot of people think it's specifically meant for commercial uses, but the village commercial allows single family, two family, and multifamily homes as well. So another goal of the comp plan was to kind of increase housing opportunities close to the downtown, close to the services in the town, by lowering the minimum lot size requirements and kind of the density requirements. This allows, if the owners of those lots so chose, two of the lots, like I said, are about 5,000 square feet. Those lots could become two-family homes instead of single-family homes, adding, another opportunity for housing close to downtown. So just because it's becoming the village commercial doesn't mean a commercial use is going in. And the two areas that I mentioned in the memo that to look closely at were the impact on the residential neighborhoods surrounding it. I'll show it on the map. So if you look up here, you can see that some of the village commercial there, the zoning district actually goes through the middle of some of those lots. So part of the parcel is zoned as village commercial and part is MDR. So that's kind of the idea of what we'd be looking for to do. So this is the lot for Alpenglow here. It's the largest of the 4 lots. What we really wanted to avoid was making that whole lot village commercial, and then you could divide the back part of the lot, which is currently undeveloped, into 2 or 3 additional village commercial lots, and all of a sudden you have restaurants or something popping up on Juniper and Vernon Street. Those are smaller scale streets in a residential neighborhood that would create a lot of impact and potential problems on those streets.
That was actually one of my questions, whether it's common to have multiple zones for a lot that size, but I didn't notice that the adjacent ones were already.
So I'm not sure how, I don't think it's common, but it seems like it's been a tool used in this area in other cases. And I think it would solve the problem because the result would be the back portion of the 92 Main Street would be kept as medium density residential district, which would only allow for single family homes and the other things allowed in the MDR. And I believe that area that would remain there would only be about 15,000 square feet. So you couldn't actually create a new medium density residential lot in the back there because you wouldn't have the required lot size to do so. And then the front part of the lot where the existing buildings are would be village commercial, and that would allow the business to operate as a retail store. So you would have the part of the lot fronting on Main Street be, allowed for commercial use, and the back part of the lot fronting on the residential neighborhood side would be kept as residential and no commercial uses would be allowed.
You approached the owner of Alpenglow, if this was originated by them, to
About that option,
describe that
yes,
unit up there.
Yeah. They seem to be okay with that. There were no plans for the owner to develop that lot any further, so they were okay. I think their goal was really just to have those few additions to the existing business.
Quickly too, if
Yep.
you could explain the triangle, those are rather odd lots. I'm just curious on those. That's just to fill in the gap.
Yeah, that would just be to keep the consistency, really. Those lots could remain the same now, but in the future, if you had increased development on either side, everything around it would become village commercial, and you'd have this very isolated lot in a potential future. So making that village commercial would just keep the kind of consistency through that corridor, where those lots could potentially be combined at some point in the future, or left as is. But it just seemed to make sense to make it more consistent rather than having this kind of spot zoning approach where you have, which kind of goes against the idea of zoning. So that was the idea behind that. The last thing that I would bring up is the kind of historic nature of some of the lots on Main Street, which 92 and 88 Main Street kind of join in that group. So we had our Main Street overlay district a few years ago passed, and that was for this really from Juniper down to Kelly Road, all those houses that front on Main Street in the medium density residential district through the Main Street overlay district could potentially be allowed to use their house for office space, which isn't usually allowed in the medium density residential district. But it also puts certain aesthetic standards in place to keep the kind of architecture characteristics of that corridor. 92 Main Street, where Alpenglow is located, was one of the contributing properties to that lot. So one of the concerns by changing that lot from MDR to village commercial was removing them from the Main Street overlay district. And, would that somehow get rid of their need to abide by those historic, aesthetic standards that are in place through the Main Street overlay district? But it turns out that 88 and 92, which are the two lots on the right hand of Main Street that would be changed, they're both listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Any lot listed on that register, if any structural changes, any development is to happen, the applicant is supposed to send those plans for review to the main Historic Preservation Committee. That committee then sends their comments on those proposed plans back to the town. The code officer or the planning board, whoever's the reviewing party, then takes those comments into consideration and can make a decision based off of those comments. So, what that's saying is, if one of those lots, even if they're not in the Main Street overlay district, if they decided, they wanted to knock down their structure and build something else, they couldn't just do that. As you might be able to in a different part of town, they would have to send for review by the State Historic Preservation Committee. And then, you would think at that point that committee would probably write against such a change if it were to really detract from a historic resource. And then those comments would come back and the planning board or code officer could make their decision based on those comments.
Clarify that too.
Yeah.
As I recall, 88, when they thought they completely tore that structure down and they built a retaining wall going down Juniper. Dave, do you remember that? Because so the current structure, it must have gone through some review because that's a relatively newer structure. Maybe it's just the facade, maybe new siding, but
Right.
I thought they completely redid that wall. Maybe not.
It could have, it might have been,
Maybe that's what it was. I mean, it's because it's a newer looking structure, but I remember, and then they put up the retaining wall going down the street. This is a long time ago.
yeah,
That came to the planning
Okay.
it might have been
Yeah,
reviewed
could
for
be.
that. I'd have to
Like that.
go back
board. It was
and,
the planning board, and because they wanted some kind of a variance to do something different. And what more
Okay.
size of the building, I've forgotten the detail.
That it seemed like a long time ago. I don't remember that. Yeah.
okay.
All right. I'm just curious.
Yep.
Okay.
But so going forward, yeah, the steps would be that if any structural, changes were to be made, and that's only for 88 and 92. 85 and 87 on the other side of the street are not part of that historic register. They're not lots listed on there, so that wouldn't apply to them. But we have performance standards in place for any historic or natural resources that, if any sort of disturbances are made, it's reviewed by another committee, and the reviewing party in the municipality can take those into consideration when making an approval. So, I mean, that's
Very good.
pretty much it. I'll open it up to.
Thank you, Kyle. Other questions for Kyle before we open it up? Public hearing?
I guess just on the backside, we're currently getting deliveries and so on there.
Alpenglow.
Yeah, we're currently getting someone behind the shop. Not to the backside, no. There's no access.
So,
All right.
if you want, you can go up to
All
the
right, I
podium
apologize.
and introduce yourself.
Just the ground rule. I mean, this meeting is recorded, so we like to have everything on the record. So the back and forth, I appreciate that, but we'll have to request when we open up public hearing just to step up, state your name, all that, just so that we can get it recorded.
Remember to turn on your microphone.
All mics
Yeah,
on?
we've got it. Can you hear me? No? Lights on. Okay. Can you hear me? It was just right. Contacted the owner, and the expectation is, understanding is there's still that residential access behind. But that's severed lot, as you explained.
Right. I think it would continue to operate the same way that it's operating now. And there would be, that would be looked at when it would still have to get the permit through the code office, like any other business would have to get a permit, and it would look at those sorts of things.
Very good. Other questions? All right, I'm gonna open it up to public comment. Anybody has an opinion, just come up to the mic. Please tell us who you are.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Gillette. I live at 115 Main Street on the corner of Westwood and Main. You may have noticed my house is for sale, but that is not because of the zoning changes that have recently occurred. It's not because of the taxes, which are high and are slated to go higher. It's because my wife and I both retired this year, and two people living alone in a 5-bedroom house doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're downsizing. But it's been our home for 25 years. 4 of our children have graduated from OHS and are doing well. I have a strong affection for the neighborhood and a concern about this rush to commercialization along the Main Street corridor. It's been really less than a year since the village overlay ordinance was passed. Basically, as I said, earmarking a stretch of approximately 1 mile and saying that these houses could be used as a sort of residential sort of enterprises. at the onset, that sounded like a really great idea, but I do think that the planning department kind of, I don't know, throw a monkey wrench in the works, because they kind of walked down this mile stretch and they singled out 49 properties as contributing properties, as properties which, because of their aesthetic or architectural or historical significance, were to be left alone and subject to planning board approval if one were to make any sorts of changes to the facade of the property. I was initially, I have to admit, flattered at first that my property was one of those chosen until I saw what that entailed, which is if I wanted to change the color of the paint, I had to come to the planning board and ask. There was an addendum to this ordinance, some 60 pages of things that hoops that we owners of these contributing properties would have to jump through in order to be able to change the facade. One of these properties is number 92. I don't blame the applicant at all for wanting to get out from under that. It's onerous in the extreme. The only reason it's not affecting me is I don't use my property as a business, never have, and have no intention of doing so. But nevertheless, I'm concerned that right on the heels of this, we have this rush to further create or enlarge the village commercial zone and push it further up Main Street. I have to say, I've seen so many villages and towns across this nation where their Main Street has become a miracle mile. And my concern, even though I'm downsizing, is that once you've lost this character of this community, you're not going to get it back. Something that's beautiful and increasingly rare is going to be lost. And so I'm against this. It seems to me that if the village overlay ordinance is in fact not working, then rescind the darn thing, and then talk about whether you want to increase the actual commercial zone. But this coming so soon on the heels of the other just seems to me like we're going gangbusters, and there's going to be a McDonald's on the corner before you know it. And I don't think that that's what you're really going to want in the long run. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Other comments? By all means.
Yeah, my name is John Tierney. I'm the owner of the property at 92 Main. Sorry I was late. There was a big accident on the interstate and delayed me about 30 minutes, but I don't, hopefully everybody's okay. So our basic request, as you probably are aware, we have a home occupation permit at the present time, and perhaps Kyle explained all that already. So excuse me if I repeat that, but what we're really looking to do is to be able to have a few additional employees, because under the home occupation we're very limited, and the majority of our business, quite honestly, is internet based at this point. And so we have a lot of shipping and things like that go out, and we really need more staff to be able to handle that effectively. So to be able to expand that, and perhaps to increase our signage, which we're pretty limited. We've been in existence here since 1993 in Orono, originally over where the Bear Brew is, and then we moved when they expanded down the street, and we've been at 92 Main since, probably 2001 or 2000 at that location, functioning in pretty much the same plan going forward in terms of how we plan to operate. Not a whole lot really changing from what we've done, except to be able to have more employees and things like that working inside the building. And we're still subject, as far as I know, and I think you may have mentioned this, to all of the historical ramifications and so forth of the property being within the historical district and one of the historical houses and landscapes and so forth like that. So, we're not really looking to try and change that or in any way either. So I don't know if people have questions for me. I'm happy to answer them.
Very good. I think the summary was well prepared in the memo, and Kyle walked us through that.
Okay.
Just before you arrived.
All right. Happy to answer anything. Thank you.
Other comments?
I'm not familiar with the number of my name is Gayle Jolla, and I live at 115, and I'm not familiar with the number of employees that you can have for a business.
Back to you, Kyle.
You're allowed 2 employees.
Okay. So,
Or a home
Home
occupation.
Outside of members of the family or
That's how it currently is. But if we make the change,
yeah, do we have a limit?
no, there's nothing in our ordinance that limits anyone in the village commercial or any other district that allows commercial uses to the number of employees. That's
So-
not something to-
I guess, it's not a very big lot. It's not a very big parking lot. We're talking about increasing deliveries, increasing business because we have more business and you want more employees. So I guess, are you outgrowing the place where you are? I mean, I think, having a tent sale, which you have had there, you do that usually once or twice a year. You have tents and you have a clearance and whatever. So I don't see that as like you need a zoning change to do that. I guess I'm just, we have commercial places in town that are vacant still. So we need to expand our village area to include commercial. I guess I would rather see something like, okay, so we're going to put up a sign and it's going to be a bigger sign and let's make an allowance for that. Let's, make a difference in terms of how many employees you can have. Let's make an exception for that. But rather than change the zoning to include, more commercial properties. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Other comments? I'm going to leave the public hearing open. And I think some context for this discussion. So that, I don't know, Kyle, if you want to weigh in on this, but through the comprehensive plan, we had identified areas around town, again, as you said, for the walkability nature.
Yep.
And this particular area, if I recall, was identified as one of the possibilities. So as we developed this comprehensive plan, looking at a 10-year projection of where we wanted the town to go, we received quite a bit of public input, took over 2.5 years, many workshops, and we tried to identify the things that many people in the town that attended, and they were well-attended meetings that weighed in on where we wanted things to go. So part of what we did in that comp plan, identify these issues and opportunities, and so it might seem sudden, but it's a gradual process to try to follow up on some of the things that came out of the public hearing process during the development of the comprehensive plan over the next 10 years. This is one of the things that fell out. We've gradually been talking about ordinance changes and some other items. The Main Street overlay was one of the items in the comp plan. So it may seem sudden, but that area was identified as perhaps one of the areas to I guess, square off and
Right.
provide that walkability and some of that character.
Right. The comprehensive plan talked about increasing housing opportunities, business opportunities, and growing the village commercial in general in a kind of way that made sense. Expanding the village commercial in any direction, you're expanding into medium density residential. So, Main Street is probably it is the largest street of any of those streets. So as far as an area that is more walkable and would be more open to kind of further uses, like that would be the area. And that's what the comprehensive plan looked at. And I'll just kind of repeat that it's not just commercial uses. Those lots can remain single family homes. They don't have to change. It could become a 2-family home and provide affordable rental for a graduate student. It could be any number of things. And I would say that, while restaurants are allowed in the village commercial, drive-through restaurants are not allowed. So, the likelihood of a fast food restaurant coming
And
in
we just
is
addressed that
right.
pertaining to the lot right across the street, because they
Correct.
wanted to drive through for, I believe it was a Starbucks perhaps. So there are limits to that.
And the likelihood that a developer would come in to, knock down a residential structure just to build a new structure for a kind of small scale retail or commercial use seems fairly unlikely when there is undeveloped land in other places. So if those, lots.
Historical, there would be limits on that any proposal.
Right, so on the 92 and 88, there would be some review at the historic level as well. So,
Binding.
what's that?
Isn't that binding?
All right, I apologize. I don't mind you making comments, but please dip up to the mic just so that we can record all this. So, in answer, so the question was, it is not binding. Could you address that?
Right, so, 92, as one of the comments mentioned before, is part of the Main Street overlay, and it would no longer be part of the Main Street overlay. And, but it would still have to follow other performance standards where any kind of changes would have to go before the state's Historic Preservation Committee for review. The town doesn't have to act on those comments. It would really be up to the code officer and the planning board at the time whether or not to take those comments into consideration. But the point is that that review would still be in place. That power would still be with the planning board or code officer to take those comments into consideration and impose any restrictions based on that to the developer.
Any change of use like that would have to come before this board with the law 88.
So a change of use, when it talks about structural changes or disturbance to the earth or something. So if if it simply changed from a single family home to an office space or something, and no physical changes were made to the lot, that wouldn't have to go through the review process. That would have to be permitted as a new use, but it wouldn't have to go to the state for the historic review. If an addition was proposed or something like that, that would have to go through common.
And then just going back to the comp plan, the Main Street Overlay District, the thought behind that was at the time there was such a large number of vacancies on some of the classic properties along Main Street. The discussion was how can we open that up to perhaps like a bed and breakfast, something like that, not very intrusive, reasonable activity, but allow a few more options with some of the properties. And at the time there was quite a bit of discussion, and that's kind of where we are today.
And just the last thing I would mention is that the village commercial in the HDR already extends this far south down Main Street on the other side of the street. The apartment building there, that's not a use allowed in the medium density residential district. So that kind of level of potential commercial uses and multifamily that already exists that low down Main Street. So this would only be matching that on the other side of the street.
Can you talk about before Evan left,
Mhm.
predecessor, quite a bit of discussion about contract zones versus we're trying to shy away from those.
Yeah. So the reason for not doing a contract zone is because it isolates, certain lots, and it kind of, defeats the purpose of having, zoning in the first place. If you have all these, I mean, that's why it's often referred to as spot zoning. You end up with, a large, area that's zoned as one thing, and then you have these random lots in between that are zoned for completely different uses. So the idea is to keep things more consistent. So when you have, something like this, where you're looking at changing the zone close enough to an existing zoning district, instead of just changing that one lot, you look at just connecting it to the existing village commercial. And I believe, not too long before I got here, something similar happened on College Ave, expanding the village commercial by a couple lots there to accommodate a business of some sort.
Yes. It's Thai Kitchen, correct?
Oh, that's on
That's the Park Street.
Park Street, yeah.
All right. Additional questions? Yep, please step up.
Yeah, I would just add that as far as employee parking, if we added a couple of employees, we have spoken with the gentleman across the street who has the large parking area in the event center, and he is willing to rent us a parking space over there to put employees at if we wanted to use it. So that's an option for us to keep traffic out of our driveway and allow, space to remain for a customer or two to park.
Did you intend to increase the size of your existing parking area, paved area?
No, that's we paved that last couple years ago now, and no, there's no intent or need to really grow that. It's really just a driveway and two little spaces that have already existed there for years that were previously gravel. So that, anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there and let folks know that we had spoken with the neighbor about that. And I suppose there's always an option, although it would probably have to come back here to allow us parking in the back, in our back portion of our lot off Juniper Street. But we'd have to develop that piece if we were to have, places for our employees to park as opposed to the primary driveway. But anyways, just wanted to make that known for everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So Kyle, just to clarify too, so 3 of the 4 lots are non-conforming. So this change would,
Right.
we would remove
So that's
a number of non-conforming lots off the books.
So out of the 4 lots, 3 of them, the 3 aside from 92, are all legally non-conforming lots. They don't meet our current zoning standards. They're well under the minimum lot size. By switching them to village commercial, they would all become conforming lots.
So I guess I just wanted to clarify a little bit about this process that began with the village overlay ordinance, with the meetings that predated the promulgation of the ordinance, if you will. I attended all of those meetings. I don't think it would be mischaracterizing to say that by and large the people at those meetings did not really want that. I think that they found themselves reluctantly going along with the idea of having this village overlay district as a means of helping people whose properties they were trying to have a business or expand a business or perhaps even sell a property. And they thought, well, if this will help our neighbors, we are willing to do that. It doesn't seem to me that we've given that really enough time to work. That's my opinion about that as to whether it will or whether it won't. But I do think a line should be drawn between what is commercial and what is not. We blurred that line the day we adopted this ordinance, this village overlay thing. And perhaps the best way to reassure people down Main Street that their residential neighborhood will be protected is to in fact insist that it remain medium density residential and not something else. My broker is going to kill me for saying this publicly. But I don't think it's in the best interest of the neighborhood to go forward with this village overlay and expanding the commercial district at the same time. So,
Others?
Dave Flewelling, 104 Main Street. I just jumped into this thing. What I'm concerned about is the traffic on Main Street has increased immensely since the time that I came here to Orono 12 years ago. And with that, it is getting much harder to get out onto Main Street with this increased traffic going to the university every hour on the hour. That brings us to the point where a commercial facility on Main Street that is going to generate more traffic into the line of traffic is, I don't think, a good thing to look at. We need to more or less stabilize the traffic entrances and exits where they are right now. To make more commercial activity doesn't seem right until you address the fact that you've got so much traffic on Main Street that you need to get that off Main Street if it's going to the university directly. Consider a different route for the university and then alleviate that situation before you create a bigger problem. Thank you.
Other comments?
I just had a question about taxes. So as part of the commercial downtown, does that change the taxes for those people in those houses by changing the zoning?
Yeah, usually taxes are not part of our purview. Kyle, if you want to take a stab at that. I'm not quite sure where.
I mean, the current downtown, there is a tax
The tip?
tax for the downtown businesses that is currently in place. It's on hold or whatever at the time is my understanding, but so if you put these in the commercial zone, these homes, then are these homes then going to be taxed at the commercial rate?
No, I don't believe there's any change to the taxes for the lots as they are. So if they were to remain the same, I believe it would remain the same. Have to really double check with the assessor, but
I mean, because the commercial building is generally taxed at a different rate than a home.
right,
than a
but these
medium
don't
tax.
have to change to commercial buildings. We're changing the zone to commercial, but the building itself is still, single family homes are still allowed in the village commercial. So the building from a tax perspective would still be a single family home. It's still a residential use. It's just happening in the village commercial district. So like the commercial 2 district on Park Street is a mixed use district. It allows all types of residential and commercial. So just because, that's why I was trying to, just because it's called the village commercial doesn't mean it's only a commercial district. It also promotes single family, 2-family, multi-family residential uses. So those would not be, then taxed as commercial uses just because they're in that district. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I believe that we can't consider this type of.
Right,
Our
taxes.
decisions are going to be based on the ordinances in financial, commercial.
Correct.
Not-
I mean, that's
we
what,
can't consider it.
right. Finances are not part of our purview. So, very good. So last call for questions from the public. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing and limit discussion to the board. Further questions for Kyle? Discussion based on what we've heard? Those of you that went through the comp plan process and the overlay, what are your thoughts?
I have some comments, I always do. So to me, I hear the public's comments, and I too, love how Orono is, and that was one of the reasons with the drive-through, we immediately said, whoa, that's gonna change Orono dramatically, potentially, the unknowns. And there are some unknowns with this, but the fact that any kind of a visual or structural change of significance has to come back before us. And really, in my mind, this is already operating to some degree as if it were a commercial entity. I mean, it's a retail space. And there's,
Just want to clarify that. So my understanding was if it goes from MDR to contract zone, the historic overlay goes out the window, and then the only reviewing agency you said would be the Maine State Historic Preservation Commission. Correct.
that's right, but that would come back before us, is that correct?
Right, if there was some sort of structural.
It's out of the overlay,
Got it.
but
Yeah.
it's still gonna come back before us if someone says, well, let's tear it down
Yes.
and build a Books A Million or something. Which seems unlikely, but things happen. You never know. That's, you're trying to think of what's gonna happen. But in my mind, if that structure stays as it is, it's gonna be pretty limited to what it can be. And in my mind, that makes sense to be part of the commercial village district, just because it's operating that way to a large degree right now. I think the traffic thing is a problem, but I don't think that this is gonna cause any kind of difference in that traffic. I mean, the traffic is because there's thousands of more students at the university. And so we can't control the university or redirect traffic. So my opinion is that we would approve this.
I think it fits with what the comprehensive plan envisioned. And it lines up one side of the street with what already exists on the other side of the street. And I don't see how it disadvantages in any way the people who have residences and want to stay there as residences. So I'm in favor of it.
Joe, you bring a new perspective.
I'm definitely in favor of it, because I'm working in that industry and see a lot of places that don't have zoning, responsibility, and it's great, a lot of problems. I like the idea of lining it up. I was just thinking of hypothetically, because of the rules for 2 employees, current zoning way set up. If out from those random business that came to us and said, we have 5 employees, what we can do, chances are we're gonna allow that use. We want to encourage business and I think that would be a spot zoning change. It doesn't make sense, then again, line up with this question. It makes a lot of sense.
What do you think, Dave?
Well, if I remember right, the overlay district, one of the reasons that we adopted that was, at least for some people, there was a concern that a lot of the buildings along Main Street were going to be bought by venture capitalists, if you will. It turned into housing, student housing, which it brings all kinds of problems. So I think that was one of the reasons for the overlay district in the first place. And I think this fits in the comprehensive plan. I like it because one of the reasons is because it's already that way across the street, so it makes it consistent. And traffic is not all day long. There's peak traffic times, and if you're running a business, you would have your traffic coming at 10 o'clock in the morning, whatever, when it's not all the traffic. There's nothing we can do about that traffic. A lot of it is generated by a development in Milford and Greenfield and so on. Beyond it, there's no way that they can get south to Bangor to work other than going through Orono.
What do you think, Mike? Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. I got in on the tail end of the overlay when I moved into this area, so I did follow along as much as I could and agreed to it as much as I could. I do appreciate what Jeff and Gayle has mentioned, that stretching further down commercial. So I understand that concern, but I don't think that's part of our conversation tonight. So I generally feel we're on track with including this. We're on the side.
Very good, thank you, Mike. I do hear the traffic concerns. As I understood, the primary applicant really isn't going to change his primary business increase seemed to be online, so perhaps a few employees, but the number of trips, being a civil engineer and Judd has background as well, it's not going to generate the kind of traffic that would really have any impact on what we see on a day-to-day basis. The amount of cars going on Stillwater and going on Main Street is absurd through town. But understand your comments. Doesn't sound like the parking configuration, the pavement's going to change, so minimal impact from that business. As I looked at 88 too, I would think that would be extremely limited. There's no room in front.
Right.
So, there would be limits as to what could happen at that property. And I did that sliver, the triangle, I don't really, just not a lot of room there
There's
to
lots
do
of,
anything.
almost entirely taken up by the existing structures there's there. And I just say again to the traffic component of it, if any new business went in and was in the process of demolishing and then building something new, that would have to go to the planning board for review, and there would have to be a traffic study done. And if it came up that there was a problem created due to traffic because of this new use, it wouldn't be allowed based on that criteria. So that would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis with any development that came up. So it's not just, it's allowed as village commercial, and now every single commercial business is eligible, just outright to go into place. There would still be the normal review process for allowing or not allowing commercial use or any other use to go in there.
There was so much discussion during the comp plan process about, people really value this corridor and just trying to maintain its integrity. I know there's a whole bunch of hoops to jump through, as you mentioned, as far as what you can do with your property, but people identified that Main Street stretch is just an integral part of this town and wanted to try to protect that. So that those are the limits. Mike, I saw your hand go up.
I know
Yeah.
we can't control the traffic, but a good part of our visual and trouble with the traffic the past week was the closure of Stillwater Avenue, the bridge construction that was legal today. So some of that will likely make
These two lanes are tough. Stillwater and Main Street. It's just a difficult situation. Other comments? We're to make a recommendation for the council.
Yes.
And just to clarify, so we make a recommendation, pass it on to council. They'll have to then consider it. So there'll be yet another opportunity for public comment at the council level, correct?
Right. So this, started in council committee and then was referred to the planning board, just like an ordinance amendment would be. The next step would be a referral by the planning board back to council committee, and then they will listen to any public comment and the planning board's recommendation, and then that gets put on a council meeting agenda, and that's another opportunity for public input.
So there will be another chance if we move forward with this to speak to council. Very good. Any further questions for Kyle? All right. I think we do go through that formal process. So could I have a motion?
You want me to read it out, or you just want a motion?
Read it out. So,
I move that we recommend a zoning change to expand the village commercial district along Main Street, that will include 85, 87, 88, and 92 Main Street to the council.
very good. You have a second? Second. Very good. Further discussion? All those in favor? Very good. Thank you. Second public hearing this evening is a proposed land use ordinance addition to define, zone, and provide performance standards for mobile food vendors. Kyle, you're up again.
Okay. So mobile food vendors, and probably more commonly thought of.
Oh, yes.
Probably more commonly referred to as food trucks, but doesn't necessarily have to be a food truck. So the way I've defined it here is any motorized vehicle or object towed by a motorized vehicle, including food trucks, trailers, carts, or wagons, that is equipped to prepare and or sell food. So the town has had, these types of, food trucks, mobile food vendors, coming in for a while, I think, and, asking to, be allowed to operate at certain businesses or at the university for different events. And we don't have a formal way to review them or define them. So this was really creating that. So up until this point, they've been reviewed as a restaurant, which seems extreme for something that might only operate for one day and then leave. But at the same time, trying to recognize that, while one mobile food vendor may operate for, one day just at a special event, another one may operate permanently, almost as a kind of accessory use at an existing business. So it's common, I think, for things like breweries to have partner with a food truck or something and have them kind of set up in the parking lot and provide that use. So the idea for this was to create kind of two levels of mobile food vendors. Mobile food vendor 1 would just be permitted through the code office. And this would be for any kind of small scale use where you're only, the mobile food vendor is only looking to operate on a lot, a couple times throughout the year at most. So if, there was an event going on at a certain business, they could just come in and get the permit. It would be reviewed by the code officer and life safety inspector, but just at that kind of town staff level. And then they would be, if they meet all the criteria, they would be awarded their permit and allowed to operate for that one day. If you want to operate for 2 or more consecutive days, or for 4 or more non-consecutive days in a year, then it would have to come to the planning board for site plan approval. The idea being that at that point, it's become more of a permanent use or more of a regularly occurring use, and an additional level of review should be taken that looks more closely at access, if they're taking away from existing parking on a lot, if they're creating any sort of nuisance or issue on a property or in an area. This would also allow, if people wanted to have events or parties, at their residences, they could bring in a food truck just for the day to park in their driveway, to act as a catering service, basically. But that wouldn't be allowed on a permanent basis because, as it states here, mobile food vendor 1 is allowed in all zoning districts. The mobile food vendor 2 would not be, it's allowed in most zoning districts, however, it wouldn't be allowed on single and 2 family lots. So you couldn't have someone in the medium density residential district with a food truck parked in their driveway, selling to the public every day of the year. That wouldn't be allowed. However, that person, if they were, holding some sort of event, they could have that truck there one day, to provide for the, whatever event they were having on their lot. And then beyond that day, it wouldn't be allowed. So then looked at, just developing a short list of standards as far as, looking at things like signage, not obstructing movement or access in parking areas for pedestrians, bicyclists, emergency vehicles, not taking away from available parking, following existing setback requirements in the zoning district, so you don't have a situation where you're right next to a property line and creating an issue for a neighboring lot, and providing waste receptacles. So, if you think of a large shopping center parking lot, if a food truck is operating at one end, kind of away from everything else, that people aren't just, throwing their trash from the business on the floor. And then for, our discussion, when we're having this discussion with council, they recommended implementing, an hours of operation that kind of mirrored our noise ordinance, so that they wouldn't be able to operate between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. So the idea behind this is that a mobile food vendor would only be able to operate if they had right title or interest with the property. So they'd have to reach an agreement with the property owner before they, were either permitted or got site plan approval. This could be with a private property owner. It could be with the town. In either situation, it would be the same, where an agreement would have to be reached before the permit could be given. So mobile food vendors would not be just allowed to operate on public roads or public parking lots. A mobile food vendor couldn't just go into the Pine Street parking lot and kind of set up shop and operate. They would have to reach an agreement with the town that was okay. So if the town, felt like, they didn't want that, whether it was for the proximity to the existing restaurants downtown or whatever it was, the town could make that decision. But yeah, so the goal was really to make the process simpler for those instances where mobile food vendors are coming in only for short periods of time. Currently, they have to go through planning board approval, get a victualer's license. It's, multi-month process for possibly one day of operation. So this aims to limit that.
There must be many ordinances out there. Where did you get the numbers? Because when I read that, no more than 3 days annually and non-consecutive, where did those numbers come from?
So there's a lot of different, ordinances on it, and people view it differently. I would say a lot of communities that have food truck, topic ordinances are looking at regulating the on-street situation more than off-street. We don't have that many opportunities for on-street parking for food trucks here. Those numbers weren't pulled out of any calculation or really reference. No, it was more so just trying to think of some point being drawn between what's temporary and more permanent. And 3, just seemed like if someone wanted to operate on a lot for one day, which I think is pretty common, or they want to work with a business for a couple different events throughout the year, that would cover that. Or if they wanted to test out a location, maybe they want to, go to a specific lot every Saturday, for a few weeks in a row, just to get a feel what it would be like before getting the full planning board approval to operate more permanently. They would be able to do that. So it sort of acts as a testing experimental period before they would then get the full planning board approval to operate on a more permanent basis.
I guess would it seem like a small number? Just when I read that, I don't know what's typical. But, you know, we've had other examples. I've seen one down at Marsh Island Brewing.
Yep.
And then I think when we approved the Family Dog, the patio out back, I think initially they were going to have a food truck out by the lawn on that one side. I was just trying to remember the examples. And then the farmer's market must be different because there's a food truck that operates out of the market. They sell grapes.
Right. So the farmers market at this point is
It's a little
kind of
different.
grandfathered
Okay.
in as we recently had the markets ordinance that came before the planning board. And yeah, so anything before that is kind of grandfathered as they are. But yeah, I mean, that number is completely flexible. It was just a matter of trying to think of the line to draw, and that's kind of what we fell on.
Did you receive any council input for this yet, or where the testing been?
Yep. So it went through council committee, I believe the community development committee.
Yeah.
No comments were made on the number. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I agree with the principle. I'm just wondering
Yep.
if the number was too small, whether it be a deterrent. This makes sense to me. To have something on the books.
I would say that most of the requests to operate, these types of establishments go through the economic development office. That's usually the contact point. And I reviewed this, idea with our economic development director. So I think his goal in general was to help to create a way that we could more efficiently get these smaller scale operations permitted. So it didn't have to take this really lengthy, overly burdensome process. So I'd say that number didn't ring any alarms for him as far as this wouldn't, or this would become, an issue for some people that would cause them to not take this route. But again, it's open for discussion.
We lost our public, so like I said, we'll open it up to questions from the board. Any thoughts on that? That was really what jumped
I
out.
have to think about the whole process to make it easier. Why make it 3 days? 10 days, 30 days, something less than like a month. We'll be here, it's sporadic throughout the year. Oddly enough, I've traveled a lot. There's a couple of the first thing talking about food benefit, like the permanent nature, like those two put together. I ran into a business in Los Angeles that was benefiting from a ridiculously low tax situation by plugging in and being their permanent status. Yeah, just as the first thing that comes to mind, I'm like, wow, here's the guy that think he's scamming the system. Our climate would prohibit probably the year-round use, but it would be 6 months or something. Again, there's we're not saying permanent. We want to ease the process for small, big permits. So I was reasoning it could be onerous to look at these longer term, more permanent things that all summer long, that one look more brewing. We might want to do something for all summer versus someone who just wants it for a week long.
Other thoughts on that? I mean, any numbers, a week?
I'm glad we're looking at it because if you're out, like we really feel all day long, you're starting to get hungry.
Yeah.
I think the same food truck goes up.
Yeah.
We're at the festival or something. Looking around, Bangor has them down on the waterfront, they're all summer.
I mean, that seems like a permanent operation. As Joe said, I think. I'm just wondering whether 3, if you're trying to make it simple, maybe a week, I don't know, for just throw the dart. Any other comments or thoughts on that?
I think a week is too long. I think a 3 is sort of the upper limit. I was actually thinking 2 days. So and I feel a motion to move up, and I'm happy to move up to 3, but I think
I think the mobile one is
beginning to
3.
be a lot, it's no longer a, like if it's going to be parked at somebody in the suburb, somewhere in the MDR in somebody's yard, I'm not sure the neighbors want it there for a week.
Yeah.
I think you're, I think 2 or 3 days, occasionally you have something that goes a little longer than 1 day.
But this is 3 days in 12 months.
Within a year.
Right, so it means
It's
that,
non-consecutive too.
Oh, okay, well then,
so they could have either 1 day in July, 1 day in September, 1 day in November, then for that 4th day, they're going to be in March. So it's not 3 consecutive days. I see what you're saying. You're thinking of yourself, you do 3 days this week or 3 days next week. Then, yeah.
Yes, in one whole year.
Right.
So again, they can't be back to back. 3 non-consecutive days is 12 months.
yeah, okay, but then I'm still with 2 days. I would say,
Yeah.
that, okay, it could be 2 days, but then, it can't be again, it can't go on beyond that. And that is again, if you are having, I could envisage some kind of an event that goes like, you have a whole bunch of company there and you want them fed. And, they show up one evening and they don't go away until the next evening.
Sounds like a movie.
Yeah.
But to be clear, it's good idea that every permit would require a permit cost. The CEO or code enforcement officer would need to look at each one.
Right.
So it's not like a guaranteed permit, 1 or 2 days.
But I think that the short term should be able to allow for 2 days.
All right,
And
the
not
proposal
have to
is-
move overnight. I mean,
So you would reduce this. Right now, it's
Are you
3
talking about
non-consecutive days.
2 consecutive days or non-consecutive?
No, 2 days.
Yep, back to back.
Consecutive days,
Okay.
but then you can't, you can maybe do it, I don't know.
2 months later, 3 months later.
Yeah, or something, but it can't.
So you want it to be like, you can have like 6 days in the year, but no more than 2 consecutive days at a time.
Right.
Something like that. So you bump the number from 3 up to 6, but put in that extra cap.
Yeah, but 2 or 3 days a year is not going for profitable business unless they go to a lot of towns, a lot of different
Yeah, I
places.
don't know how, they must.
I think you you really zeroed in too much on it. To get anybody to have a business.
So-
The intent is to make this less.
So, yeah, so the one thing I want to mention is that this is, it's on any one lot. So a mobile food vendor,
That's why
could-
they go.
yeah,
bounce
they could
around.
bounce around to many different lots and have their,
3 times a year on that one lot.
yeah,
That was
Yeah.
the
Maybe the
question.
town, all 200.
right.
365 days.
So they could be at, at one business one day and
Ice cream
another
truck
business
or
the next
various
day.
lots.
Right,
It's not 3 days for the whole year. So if they wanted to operate, at multiple, kind of big events or big weekends throughout the year, and they have different sites in mind, they would just have to get that permit for each of
But
those.
the town staff, would just as long as they wouldn't abuse it, because you'd obviously be kind of aware of kind of trying to milk the system or whatever you would.
Right.
Phrase you want to call it. Dave, you sound.
well, but they still have the opportunity to go and get a permanent license, right? I used to manage a mill, and I know a guy came in every day at noontime with his wagon, and that was his business. 5 days a week, whatever, however many days it is, 52 weeks a year, 50 weeks a year, whatever.
Yep.
So that would be handled separately, different ordinance.
So then.
Is that what I understand?
Well, this-
Through the paces and-
That's the number two.
Yeah, that would be a mobile food vendor too. So they would come, but it would be similar as to how a regular restaurant is permitted. They would come to the planning board for site plan approval, and they would have to get a victualer's license through the council, which is exactly how a restaurant operates. It's just that this gives you specific standards geared towards how a mobile food vendor operates. When reviewing them as a restaurant doesn't really apply, because just because they sell food doesn't really mean they're the same type of establishment.
To Dave's earlier point, though, to make this profitable, generally they're probably going to come in for a weekend somewhere if it was some kind of event. And I'm sure that's where the 3-day thing would come in. I would think we'd want to allow them 3 consecutive days for a weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Right. So the reason I didn't write it that way is because allowing them on, we wanted to allow the opportunity for them to act as catering opportunities on residential lots, and not have them operate in residential neighborhoods for multiple days in a row. So that was the reason for not having the
Thought of residential.
Right. And if it was something like a planned event, a whole weekend, the idea would be that they would know about that well enough ahead of time that they would be doing something like that, that they would have time to go through the lengthier approval, rather than just getting a call the week before. And so again, that's just the thought process that we use. Doesn't mean it can't change.
The weekend comment is interesting. So, and Krista mentioned this as well. So maybe it's a combination of things. So I heard no more than 2 consecutive days, and maybe a larger number for a 12-month period. You had wanted, perhaps more days. I'm just wondering if a mix. So I don't want anybody to have to go through a really onerous permitting process if they're just coming in for a weekend. That makes sense to me. But maybe you say, mobile one is 5 days, or maybe it's a week, whatever it is, but no more than 2 consecutive days. I'm just grasping here, trying to listen to what.
Well, this isn't all written in stone. It can be changed if it doesn't work. If we need more days, we can add days, right?
It's a good point. This could easily be see how this goes for a year. If, applicants come in and, this meets all of the demand that we get, then, we can say, well, this seems to be working well. If, we find out, everyone comes in and they want this number of days, and that kind of pushes them over the mobile food vendor 1 limit threshold, then maybe we come back and review it. So
the other thing you could do would be allow the code enforcement officer, right, to have a little bit of show judgment in the various applications. And somebody comes in and says, well, I've got a folk festival, I want to need to do it 3 days. Well, he could have the ability to say, okay, that's fine, do it 3 days. But normally it would be 2, or whatever the numbers are.
that's more difficult.
Yeah, that's the great.
You put in there, use best judgment.
Well, I mean,
That's what it's supposed to do in every case, right?
We should be able to talk about that way. I agree. For incremental improvements, I think this is incremental improvements, and I'm good with it as it is, but I'm fine bumping it up if you want. I'm comfortable with 2 consecutive 6, it's just a little bit more complication, but like they said, it's always easy to go up, but not always easy to come back down. But when was the last time you proved that? In front of us, so
I think Marsh Island might have been.
2 years ago?
Like I said, how often do we want?
And we never see them, like, that's never there.
No.
Right? So,
Well, that was, she's down on the river. That was just trying out for being around season.
Okay. Okay.
I'd say
That's an interesting point that we could just try it for a year. If it's not working, maybe we revisit it. Do we want to consider, perhaps the weekend change maybe it's 3 days, no more than 2 consecutive. I don't.
I can take all of the comments anyway, regardless of actual motion recommendation. I can take all of that to council and then can have that kind of discussion at that level as well. So.
Yeah, I think that'd be fine. What do you think about that? Do we want to try this version? I don't.
I think we could try this version. I mean, that's okay.
I mean, the purpose is to be more less, onerous. I just think, I think you should at least strike the non-consecutive. Because we can't have it come before us to ask for permission for a food truck.
All right, so I think that's a reasonable comment. So if we want to stick with 3 days, no more than 2 consecutive out of those 3, maybe, and that would allow somebody come in for, if they have 1 weekend a year,
right,
give them a little bit of latitude, but without abusing
sure,
the option. That seem reasonable?
It's no different than campgrounds.
Yeah.
You can't, somewhere at a campground, you have to, how many days you
Yeah.
how many times you come back.
For first practices, incremental, would that be reasonable? I mean, we haven't had a lot of food trucks coming in, but maybe this is a step in the right direction, but if it doesn't work, we can revisit that.
Maybe nobody wants to.
It appears that's the case. For clarification, are we saying that food truck is safe to eat by giving them a permit?
Well, they have to have state licenses that would determine that, yeah. Right, right. There's a mobile food state license.
All right, well, if I heard people right, we can stick with the 3 days, no more than 2 out of those 3, no more than 2 consecutive days, and just see how it flies.
I have a sort of something question about on the first page, amend chapter 18, where we have for the, who makes the decision. Mobile food vendor 1 is permitted, that's fine. And as far as I'm concerned, and then mobile food vendor 2 has site plan review. In other words, they come to the planning board. And the thing that I'm wondering about is that the mobile food vendor 1 is allowed in the low density residential area, but the mobile food vendor 2 is not, can't even go there with a site plan review.
Yep.
It seems to me they ought to be able to do that.
So,
You might not want to, but.
so the low density residential district only allows residential uses. And the idea was that mobile food vendor 1 would be allowed on a very limited basis to operate at a residential use. So that would be allowed in the FNA, the LDR, MDR, HDR. The mobile food vendor 2 would not be at residential uses because it's operating at a more frequent basis, and then all of a sudden you're opening up, you're basically having a commercial use on a residential property. A restaurant wouldn't be permitted on those lots. So really, why is the mobile food vendor? Because that's mobile food vendor 2, they could be there every single day. So it's not allowed in LDR just because there's nothing really but residential taking place in the LDR. In the FNA, the MDR, and the HDR, there are other uses going on aside. The FNA might have outdoor recreation facilities where a food truck might want to operate, and it could be a commercial business, just a kind of recreational business. The HDR has multifamily housing, so allowing them the opportunity to operate, at one of the apartment complexes to provide in their parking lot to provide food. The MDR has, the building we're in now. If the town was holding an event and wanted one parked in, the lot behind here, that would allow that. So, but then the standard in the mobile food vendor 2 section states that they're not allowed to operate on single or two-family dwellings. So even though it says they're allowed in the FNA and MDR and HDR and not in the LDR, they're still not allowed to operate on any single or two-family homes in those other districts, even though they're allowed.
All right, so that's spelled out under the,
Yeah, it's just clarified a little.
Okay.
I just wanted to not add any more footnotes to that ever-growing list of footnotes in our land use table.
okay, I'm satisfied with that explanation.
I don't see the need to open up the hearing for public comment. It seems a little sparse out there,
You can
so,
always receive public comment.
very good. So it seems like we're ready for a motion, please.
I move that we recommend to the town council the approval of the proposed land use ordinance edition to define the mobile food vendors 1 and mobile food vendors 2 standard.
With our amendment,
With the change to have 3 total days or 2 consecutive days allowed for mobile food 1,
no more than 2 consecutive days.
no more than 2 consecutive and 2 total.
Correct.
Clear.
I can go back and listen to it again.
Very good. Have a motion, have a second.
Very good.
Very good. Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, moving on. We have other new business. None on the list. Discussion. Kyle, what do we have coming up?
There is nothing set in stone yet. Maybe a meeting in November, but maybe not. Still,
Anything, nothing on the horizon?
no, nothing for sure. So can't release.
Okay, good. Next up is adjournment. Have a motion, please. Very good. Second? All right. Discussion? Nope. All those in favor? All right. See you in a month, perhaps. Yeah, depends on what Kyle drums up for us.